Hi, I'm Maggie, and this is Ollie, and together we are Dog-Eared Pages.
Ollie, how are you doing today? He says, it's so cold, and I hate the snow, and I just want to be nice and warm inside.
Yeah, he really doesn't like playing in the snow.
You'd think he would. He has a very playful personality. But instead, he'll take one step out and he'll just run right back inside. So we have to coax him outside to go bathroom. Will we fall asleep again?
Today, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 books that I read in 2023. This list has a sort of a mix between fantasy, horror, speculative fiction, and all those genres sort of combined. In my number 10 spot, I have Heuvelt by Leigh Bardugo. This is the sequel to Ninth House. Now, as you can see, when I took the stickers off of this copy that I got at Target, they left really, really bad marks and residue behind, so I would like to implore publishers, please stop putting stickers on books. It ruins the books. I'm very upset with this copy. I think that this is a really, really solid sequel to Ninth House. I think it explores the side characters and their backgrounds a lot more, and I think if you enjoyed Ninth House, you'll probably also enjoy Heuvelt. You're going on romps through hell, you're getting chased by demons all throughout the real world, you're getting a lot of more of the cult side of stuff in this series. So if you liked Ninth House, then I would suggest Heuvelt. Ninth House essentially is a mystery book mixed with horror, fantasy, and dark academia that explores the dark side of societies at Yale, or secret societies at Yale. So you're getting a lot of really, really heavy topics, so check your trigger warnings and your content warnings for this series. It's not a series that's for everyone. It can be dense and slow going at times, but once the action kicks in, you will have a hard time putting the books down. Now, I gave this a 4.5 out of 5, and I will definitely be continuing with this series once the third installment comes out, and I would highly recommend this series. It's really, really fun, and it's really deliciously dark. In my number 9 spot, I have City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was my first book by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I had heard a lot of good things about Tchaikovsky as a writer in general. I know he does a lot of sci-fi work. I'm not super huge on sci-fi, so I wanted to pick up a fantasy by him, and I was really pleasantly surprised with how well this turned out. City of Last Chances is about a fictional city under occupation of a foreign sort of power, foreign country, and it's taking a deep dive into what it means to sort of be under occupation and what it means for the people that are both being occupied, like the native people and the residents of this city, and then also you're taking a look at the people who are actually the occupiers. So it's a really, really wide, large cast of characters, and you're exploring a lot of different sides of this situation, which is very interesting. You're not just getting a straight up like black and white type of setup here. You're getting a lot of gray areas with the motivations of the characters, why they're doing what they're doing, seeing how a revolution starts to begin. And it's really, really interesting when you see that kind of stuff on a small scale level sort of blowing up as the story progresses. It is very slow to start with, but once it really gets going and you really get deep into the plot and the wheels start turning for what the characters' motivations are and what exactly is really happening, I think that this is a really, really, really good book. I was blown away by the prose in particular, and I also really liked essentially just the setting of the city of Ilmar. So the city of Ilmar is a very like steampunk setting, I would say. They have technology in this world, but it is not super advanced. The fantasy elements in this are also very, very soft fantasy. I would say there's a soft magic system. It's not overtly in your face. If you really want to read a book that takes a deep dive at human behavior in the midst of a lot of political and social strife with some soft magic in a sprawling city for your background, then I would say City of Last Chances is a really, really good choice. And I also plan to pick up the sequel next month, which is called House of Open Wounds. And the sequel is loosely connected to this first book. I know that you can read the books out of order. It's sort of like a series of standalone books. So I'm still really excited to dive back into this world. But I also like the idea that you can read these books out of order and that they have their own contained stories within each book. Now, I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 because I did have a little bit of issues with the characters. I feel like they could have been fleshed out a little bit more, and I feel like they were really just sort of tools to move the plot along, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I know a lot of people really, really liked this book and didn't mind that the characters weren't as fleshed out as they could have been, but I personally prefer characters that are just a little bit more fleshed out. That being said, the characters in this book are far superior to most other books that I read last year, so don't be deterred just because I took off a 0.5 rating. Up next, I have The Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin. So this is probably the only sci-fi book that is on my list, or moderately sci-fi. I would say it's a sci-fantasy book. And if you really like martial arts and you kind of like it in a dystopian setting, you need to pick this book up. This book is decently long, and I read this book in probably like 3 days because it is so action-packed. It's essentially about a society in a near future where instead of settling disputes with other countries through war, they send one soldier or one person each to settle it through a hand-to-hand combat sort of tournament, I would say. And it follows a young boy named Sigo, who is recruited by a former griever. That is what the warriors are called in this society. And you're seeing Sigo as he starts to rise through the ranks to become a top-tier griever himself. There's a lot of found family tropes in here. There's a lot of mentor-mentee type of tropes in here. Amazing action sequences. And you can really tell that the author of this book is a black belt himself. I'm not exactly sure what he's a black belt in. I think it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But you can really tell that he knows the material that he's writing about. Now, I did give this 4.5 instead of a full 5-star rating, solely because there was a little bit of a twist that happened, and I wasn't sure if I'm still not sure if I like the direction that this series is going in. Overall, I still want to continue. I still think that element, that plot twist, isn't going to detract from the series as a whole. And I can't wait to dive back into this world with the sequel, Griever's Blood. And I'm just really excited to continue with this. This is a really, really fun series. Next up is the only graphic novel that I have on this list. It is called The Many Deaths of Laila Starr. It has some truly gorgeous, gorgeous artwork in here. I mean, look at that. It is amazing. And this I gave a 4.75 out of 5 solely because I just wanted more. I felt like I could have read another couple hundred pages of this story. Essentially, it is about death as the god, and she is cast down to earth because her services are no longer required because it is known that a human is going to be born that is going to discover the secret of mortality. So you're kind of seeing death as immortal now, and how she's living as immortal and coming to terms with what mortality is. And she's also, you kind of follow her as she finds the human that is going to eventually create immortality, and you see them and their interactions and their conversations about mortality and life and death. And it was just very, very profound, I would say, and beautiful. And I would just really recommend it to anyone who really likes speculative fiction, who really likes philosophical fantasy and conversations that really make you think within a book or a story in general. I would say if you really love beautiful art, that I would recommend this. And I would also say if you really want a setting that is not the typical like medieval fantasy, I would suggest picking this up because this has a more, I would say, Middle Eastern feel to it. And I really, really liked that was the setting and the culture that they chose because it made this graphic novel richer in general. So I gave this, again, 4.75 out of 5. And I really do want to check out some more work by the author and the illustrator of this graphic novel. Next, we have Bonesmith. So this is my first on the list that has a pure 5 out of 5 rating. My friends like to joke with me that I'm allergic to 5 stars because I really need a lot from a book to give it a full 5 stars, and thankfully this one delivered. Now I would say this is more of a soft 5-star rating because in comparison to the 5-star books that are going to be coming up next, this is obviously going to be much lower on the spectrum for me. But this book really made me feel like I was a teenager again, reading fantasy books and staying up late to finish and just being totally immersed in a world where I was just in love with everything. I had a thrill when I was reading this. I read this, and this book is like almost 500 pages, and I read this in like 3 days. I know for some people that's a long time maybe, or not quick at all, but for me it's pretty quick, I would say. Everyone in this world has some type of smith ability. The main character is a bonesmith, so she can control bones, dead bones at least, only dead bones. So her sole purpose in the society is finding the bones of the dead and sort of working with another bonesmith in order to sort of detach those bones from the land of the living, because ghosts are actually attached to bones. So she fights essentially ghosts through using her bonesmith abilities. In Bonesmith, you're gonna see the main character be banished from the House of Bone, and you see her go on a journey to the sort of outer wall that is of the country, that is sort of serving as a barrier between a legion of undead ghosts that have insane amount of power that not a lot of people can even battle properly. So there's a literally a wall of stone covered in bone dust to sort of shield the rest of society from this area. So as she goes there, she starts to uncover a huge political conspiracy about the origins of this place and why there's a wall there and what exactly happened. And I really thought that the political intrigue in this book, especially for a young adult novel, was really just fleshed out and intricate. I would not have expected political intrigue in this at all. I just really expected some really awesome, cool, dark magic and action, but I got a lot more than that. And I really liked our main character. She was really brash and just like in your face and full of herself, but she got really humbled by the end of this book. I really liked this. If you want a fast-paced, dark sort of fantasy novel, then I would suggest this, especially if you're just looking for something a little bit lighter. Now, it is dark, but it's still light given the tone and given that it's YA. But I think that this is definitely elevated YA, if that makes sense. It's definitely above most of the YA that I've read lately.
This is Ollie again. He's fighting with my other dog. I'll show you her right now. Guppy. Say hi, Guppy. She's a King Charles Cavalier, and Guppy is actually deaf, so she cannot hear anything at all. But Ollie helps her out a lot, and she's really sweet, and she's the total opposite of Ollie. Ollie likes playing a lot, but Guppy just likes to sleep and eat, and that is it. So here's your cameo from Guppy. I hope you'll be best friends with her. She is going to be appearing on the channel a lot as well. Yeah, say hi, Gup. Oh, look at that little tongue. She's so cute.
Up next is Hex by Thomas Olde Heuvelt. This is the only translated book I have on the list, and one of the only horror books I have on the list, but this book really blew me away. I'm still thinking about it months after reading it. I believe I read it in September, but this is translated from Dutch, and it is my first book by this author, but I would like to read more. And essentially this book is a sort of very interesting take on a witch curse sort of plot, but instead of it being very overtly about the witch, it is instead about the people surrounding this witch. And basically you're in a town in New York, a small town, very picturesque, serene town, but instead of it being perfect, you are having a witch walk around chained up with her eyes and mouth completely sewn shut. She seems to be a ghost from the 1800s or so, and she just shows up and spots randomly around the town. It's only in this town that this is happening in. So you're following a cast of characters as they're interacting with the witch, and sort of how this is affecting their lives, and how everything starts to spiral out of control once someone essentially crosses a line with how they're interacting with this witch. And you're seeing basically how the enemy in this book, or the antagonist in this book, is not the witch at all, but the humans in the town. And I really thought that this was a scathing look at humanity and how we ourselves cause our own destruction. It is a brutal book. It is really disturbing. There are some scenes in here that I was just appalled reading, but I would say if you really like horror and you really want to be disturbed, like, I wouldn't say I was scared at all, but I would say I was disturbed. But if you like horror and you want a book that's going to stay with you for a really, really long time with really good social commentary, I would say Hex is a great book to pick up. I gave this a 5 out of 5. Next is The Child Thief by Brom. Now, this is the first Brom book that I've ever read, but it's not going to be my last. This is honestly one of my favorite books that I've read in a really, really long time. It is a brutal, brutal retelling of Peter Pan. And if you like Disney's Peter Pan, this book is gonna not be for you. It's a really, really dark retelling. I would say it's not for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of gore. There's a lot of violence against children too. So that is a big, big trigger warning in this book. But essentially you're following Peter, or the child thief, as he goes to the human world, and he steals, or rather sort of tricks, kids into coming back with him. And these kids are usually in very, very bad family situations, or they're involved in bad activities like drugs. And when he brings them back to his world, or Avalon, are essentially bringing these kids into a worse situation because they're becoming devils or lost boys, and they're getting caught in a war that is in Avalon. So Peter is essentially recruiting soldiers. And besides Peter's point of view, you're also getting Nick's point of view, who is a kid that Peter brings back to Avalon in the first chapter. So essentially you're getting a lot of Peter's origins, a lot of why he's doing what he's doing, why the war for this world is so important to him, and why he's stealing children away. And then you're also getting a perspective from Nick's point of view as a kid who has never been to Avalon, and is seeing and experiencing this world and all the monstrosities of it for the first time. It's amazing. I would say, even though it is absolutely brutal, there's a lot of beauty in this book. It's a tale that feels classic, but also modern. And I would say, if you like Guillermo del Toro, especially Pan's Labyrinth, that is the type of horror fantasy that we're talking about here. Really brutal, sad horror. There's a lot of sad moments in this book, but there's also a lot of amazing fantasy world building. The world building in this book is amazing for a standalone. I just felt like I had been in Avalon for ages, even though I was only in it for about almost 500 pages. And compared to like a series, that's not a lot, but Brom really, really developed this world and the characters very, very well, especially for a standalone. He also did a lot of really, really cool illustrations that you can see. So if you want a really immersive reading experience, I would say The Child Thief is great for you. There's a lot of illustrations in here even before the start of each chapter. So you really will know what the characters look like, what the settings look like, how this world feels. I really don't have any qualms with this book at all. This was almost perfect in my eyes. I gave this a solid 5 out of 5 stars. Next, we have The Gutter Prayer and The Shadow Saint. So The Shadow Saint would be in the number 3 spot, and The Gutter Prayer would be in the number 2 spot. So this is a very criminally underrated series. These books are phenomenal. The plot, the characters, the world, everything is absolutely masterfully crafted. This is a book series that is completely genius in the sense that the creativity in this world is beyond pretty much anything that I've read this year. And pretty much ever too. I haven't experienced a world as brutally nuanced as this. There's a lot of alchemy, there's a lot of steampunk elements in this series. There's also mad gods and creatures that I've never seen in any other fantasy series before. If you really want to experience something completely new, pick up these books. If you also want to experience a world that has a lot of societal commentary, a lot of political intrigue, a lot of scathing sort of criticism on religion, pick up these books. Now, I really don't want to give too much away about what it is, but I will say in the first book, it follows 3 characters who are very different from each other. And essentially, they're going on a heist in the first chapter. And the heist goes very wrong, and it just sets off a very big chain of events that leads to a very, very big problem in this world that essentially sets up the second book, The Shadow Saint. Last but not least is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This was my favorite book that I read in 2023. And everyone really has already mentioned this on BookTube, so I feel like I'm a little late to the party, but this is a standalone epic fantasy. And this book essentially accomplishes what a series tries to do in one book. It's a longer book, it's chunky, but it still is a full, complete story within all 600 pages or so of it. And if you like elemental magic and martial arts, riveting battles, complex characters, then you need to pick this up, because this book made me very, very emotional. And I don't get very emotional when reading. I get a little bit more emotional when watching TV or movies. But this book broke my heart. I haven't been that gutted with the events of a plot in a very, very long time. And it's also just a very thrilling book. It has some of the most intense action sequences that I've ever read in my entire life. And I read them very fast, especially for this book being so long. It flew by. Now, in The Sword of Kaigen, you are essentially following 2 main characters. One is Mamoru, who is a 14-year-old, and he does have a bit of a stereotypical chosen one feel to him, but that trope is subverted a lot with his character and the work that Wang does with him. And then you're also following Misaki, who is his mother. And you don't see a lot of mothers typically in fantasy. That's not the norm of the characters we usually follow. But motherhood is explored very profoundly within this novel, especially because you're also following a mother who is also a warrior. And sort of balancing motherhood and being an elite warrior was a very, very interesting way to juxtapose this character. I also think that the plot of this book was amazing. It hooked me from the beginning. You're essentially following Misaki and Mamoru because they live on the Kusanagi Peninsula, and the Kusanagi Peninsula has been given the name the Sword of Kaigen because everyone on this peninsula has been training to be elite warriors, and they are the country's first defense to war. Now, right now, it's supposed that they are living in an age of peace against the other rivaling sort of countries. But Mamoru sort of figures out slowly that this age of peace is a farce, and he's in for a rude awakening as war starts to close in on him, his family, everyone in the peninsula, and essentially the country of Kaigen in general. I would say that this book is probably one of my favorite books I've read in my life. And I think that everyone, as a fantasy fan, especially if you like Asian-inspired fantasy, you need to pick this up and you need to read it. Please, please read it. This book is essentially everything that I want in a fantasy novel. I couldn't have asked for more.
Ollie was sleeping on my bed while I was doing my video, but now he's awake. Kind of. Oh, poor little boy.
That is it for my top 10 books of 2023. Let me know if you've read any of the books, what you liked about them, what you disliked about them. I'd love to hear your opinions. Share with me your personal favorite books of 2023. I'd love to add even more books to my monstrous TBR that will eventually kill me one day. And let me know what you have planned for the rest of the reading month. Thank you for coming to Dog-Eared Pages. I'm Maggie,
and this is Ollie,
and we're signing off. Bye!